Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1255 of the Juicebox Podcast. James was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 46 years ago in 1978 at the age of 22 while he was in the Naval Academy. He was just 30 days shy of becoming an ensign when he was diagnosed. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. People who want to buy quality and comfortable towels, sheets, and clothing should go to CozyEarth.com, and they should also use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout to save 30% off of their entire order. If you're looking for community around type 1 diabetes, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. But everybody is welcome. Type 1, Type 2, gestational, loved ones, it doesn't matter to me. If you're impacted by diabetes and you're looking for support, comfort, or community, check out Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. Don't forget the Juice Cruise 2025 is on sale right now at juiceboxpodcast.com. Scroll down to the banner with the big boat on it. Click on it. And just like that, you'll be vacationing with me and all of my friends. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. US Med is sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, and we've been getting our diabetes supplies from US Med for years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or the number, get your free benefits check, and get started today with US Med. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. An implantable 6-month sensor is what you get with Eversense, but you get so much more. Exceptional and consistent accuracy over 6 months, and distinct on-body vibe alerts when you're high or low. On-body vibe alerts? You don't even know what that means, do you? EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Go find out.
Hello, Scott, and thank you for inviting me to join you. My name is James Gafford. I'm been type 1 diabetic for not quite 46 years now. Today's the 29th of February. Happy Leap Day, by the way.
Oh.
In 2024. I was diagnosed on May 8th, 1978, and there's a story that surrounds that. Our mutual friend, Stephen Woodward, was the one who suggested I might be an interesting guest for you, and it has to do particularly with that story about how I came to be part of this. I don't know. Community is one word that comes to mind. Carpet is another one that comes to mind.
That's how I got stuck here.
Cesspool is another one that comes to mind. There's lots of ways you can frame the whole experience of being type 1. But for me, how it got started was I was a midshipman at the United States Naval Academy class in 1978 and was 30 days from graduating the day I was diagnosed. Now, had that not happened, I would have been on June 7th, 1978, I would have been commissioned an ensign in the United States Navy. I would have gone in relatively short order to nuclear propulsion school and become eventually who knows what would have happened or what the details were, because A, they didn't. And B, there's no predicting. If there's one thing we know about this particular affliction, it's that in a lot of ways, there's no predicting what's going to happen today or tomorrow or a week from now, let alone a year or 10 years from now. But what we do know is that we couldn't have had this conversation 100 years ago, because at that point in time, nobody lasted 46 years with this, because it was a fatal disease, relatively short order. And that's not the truth today. So that's part of why I'm here. And figuring that out for myself has been an adventure. And
no, I bet. Well, how old were you in 78? Like 2021?
I was 22 years and 44 days and about 6.5 hours old, I think. Not that I was
counting.
Not that I'm counting really, really close.
So you were 22 when you were diagnosed in 78.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you always want to be in the Navy?
Well, what I wanted to be was an astronaut. That was hands down my thing I was going to do. And So there's a chain of reasoning that goes along with that starts with astronauts are mostly ex-military test pilots. Ex-military test pilots are military pilots, are military officers, are became officers some way. The most prestigious way to do that is go to a service academy. I'm thinking Air Force Academy, and I have an older brother who was a career NCO in the Marine Corps who phoned me one day and said, "Nobody in our family is going to Air Force. You're going to Navy." So, so that was the inspiration. And I went through the whole application process and received an appointment. Started in the summer of 1974 after I graduated high school, and I actually had to start wearing glasses my sophomore year, my youngster year, which at that point in time, the requirements were such that would have eliminated me from pilot training. But at this point, I'm far enough into the whole experience of being a Navy guy and being dedicated to it and wanting to finish certainly and go ahead and be commissioned. So I'm starting to think, well, what are interesting or productive and prestigious things I can do, and nuclear propulsion was a big deal at the time, still is. Mm-hmm. So that seemed to be the way to go. So, and I was I was actually a double engineering major, finished all the requirements and received a degree in aerospace engineering. I also finished all the requirements for a systems engineering degree, but damn them, they wouldn't give me 2 degrees. I'm still pissed about that.
I was going to say, like, did you just want to do this or were you good at it? But those are some degrees that would tell me you'd be great at it.
Yeah.
I guess most people wouldn't realize, but there are more naval pilots than pilots in any other branch of the military, right? If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready with Gvoke HypoPen. My daughter carries Gvoke HypoPen everywhere she goes because it's a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above that I trust. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. Luckily, Gvoke HypoPen can be administered in 2 simple steps, even by yourself in certain situations. Show those around you where you store Gvoke HypoPen and how to use it. They need to know how to use Gvoke HypoPen before an emergency situation happens. Learn more about why Gvoke HypoPen is in Arden's Diabetes Toolkit at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on the top of your kidneys called a pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called an insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
That I don't know, and I suspect probably the Air Force has got more, mainly because that's principally what they do. The Navy flies airplanes, but they also drive ships and submarines and a bunch of other stuff. So I can't give you statistics on that, but they do have a lot of pilots and they do crazy things like come in and land on a 300-foot long aircraft carrier deck, and so it's an interesting life. I know a lot of guys who I went to school with, who I still stay in touch with, who that was part of their careers. And as it happened, as I say, that was all in the future. That was all the path ahead of me. And on the 8th of May, 1978, suddenly that path was no longer available. There was a barrier down in front of it, and I was going a different direction.
Do they discharge you, or do they just put you into a different?
No. They discharged me. What happened was I graduated and got my engineering degree, and then received an honorable discharge for medical reasons from the service. Naval Academy midshipmen, Air Force, and Army cadets are active duty personnel. So this was a medical discharge from an active duty position. One of the interesting fallouts from that in the long run is that it makes me eligible for medical care from the Veterans Administration. And that actually is literally where I get all of my medical care these days.
Oh, wow.
And there's a story about how I got into that, too, because for a long time I didn't think I was eligible for it, but it turned out I was. And the VA actually classes my type 1 diabetes as a service-connected disability. So one of the little bullet points I kind of have on my talking list here is for anybody who is a type 1 diabetic who was active duty at the time they were diagnosed, to the best of my, and I'm not an authority on this, but I am an example, and it's certainly a precedent. And I know that there are a great many people at the VA who receive their treatment under this general guise of what's called a service-connected disability. We think in terms generally of things like people who get limbs blown off in a minefield, things like that. But the general description that goes along with that, or that general category, is a little bit broader. It really means anything that happens to you medically while you're active duty causes you to then become no longer eligible to serve for medical reasons. You get a discharge. You have to go through an application process, and they have to approve you. But it's a kind of a one-way ratchet operation where once you get approved, you're there. You're never going to lose that particular disability rating. So
interesting. I wonder why. I've always wondered why. You're not the first military person I've spoken to who's been diagnosed like during service. Why would they not take quality people and just move them into a more, I don't know, like a branch where you wouldn't have to pick up a gun? I get the idea that we're all supposed to be able to fight, but
that's actually really an excellent question. And so part of the answer to that is timing. You got to consider this is 46 years ago. Were that to happen today, I think it's not unlikely that the U.S. government certainly has an interest once they've spent all the money to educate you for 4 years at a what is the equivalent of one of the better 4-year educational institutions in the world, and they spend a considerable amount of money on your education and on your military training, and part of the requirement once you graduate is that you have you have an obligation to serve for. It varies somewhat depending on what you do, but typically it's on the order of about minimum service obligation of about 5 years to pay back that investment to the government. And it's a win-win all the way around, or at least it's supposed to be. So when a circumstance like this happens, if there's a way to keep someone on active duty out of what we in the Navy would call a line officer role, then they do. And at the time I graduated, I had a classmate who graduated with type 2 diabetes. They commissioned him into the supply corps. But with type 1 at that time, we did not have the tools to manage it in a way. It certainly weren't CGMs. So imagine now, middle of the night, the mid-watch, midnight to 4 a.m., on the bridge of a 60,000-ton missile cruiser out in the middle of the ocean, and the officer of the deck is a type 1 diabetes, and suddenly he's having a blood sugar crash, and there's other emergent circumstances that pop up. That's like adding to a perfect storm.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I take your point on that, but I don't know why you can't be an engineer in an office somewhere back in like Virginia, like making decisions about.
That's an entirely valid point, but the policy at the time was the policy at the time, and it has probably, I believe, it's evolved since then. There was a young man who graduated just this last summer, the class of 2023, who was blind. He had a congenital problem with his retinas that was undiagnosed until right before his senior year, but they let him go ahead and finish and graduate. And then he went through a similar, from what I read about him, he went through a similar set of circumstances. Like that he graduated, got his degree, and then got a medical discharge from the service. So in my case, I'm grateful that they allowed me to go ahead and finish. I mean, 30 days at that point, I'm like 1 foot from the finish line.
Right.
So it would have been adding insult to injury, I think, to say no. But
what happens then to you? Like, I mean, 22 years old, you've got a path. You've been on it for quite some time. There are a lot of big goals and dreams in there. None of them are going to happen now. And so psychologically, do you fall apart or do you pivot? How do you handle that pressure?
That's another good question. And for me personally, I can look back and I have memories of that, being in a hospital bed and pretty much not being able to sleep an entire night with tears coming down my eyes, and then eventually being so exhausted that I did fall asleep for a few hours. And when I woke up, having this, I don't know quite how to describe this sense that, okay, I didn't plan this. I didn't pick this. This is horrible. Somehow I got to go forward. So I started, looking around and asking questions. That summer after I got home, after graduation, I spent the summer traveling around the country on job interviews, and I think I had 9 offers. I wound up going out to Southern California, to the Los Angeles area, and went to work in the aerospace industry. I started, my first job was working on the space shuttle program, and this was about 2.5 years, 78, 79, about 2.5 years before the first space shuttle launch. So I was actually part of that program.
Wow.
As a civilian, as an engineering employee in a large aerospace company. That I could do. And it also, interestingly, working for a big company like that, they all have medical insurance plans for their employees. And I don't care what you're, I'm just another dot on a graph someplace. So I'm not a big expense for them as far as taking. And at the time, found an endocrinologist and had a prescription for insulin, and it was beef, pork, insulin. This was even before Humulin came out. But that was the beginning of my career as an aerospace engineer. And I actually refer to myself these days as a recovering aerospace engineer. I stole that line from a friend of mine.
Well, I want to hear where it took you. So, but first of all, beef and pork. So were you just shooting it once a day or twice?
Yeah, I believe it was once. Yeah, it was once a day injection of beef, pork, insulin. So that, I don't go back as far as some of the people like Stephen and our friend, another one of our friends do, who, go back to the days of boiling glass syringes and sharpening needles on, and again, that was also beef, pork, insulin at the time. But that's where I got started in early 80s, I believe, is when Lilly first came out with Humulin.
Right.
That was their first recombinant DNA generated insulin.
Like you did regular and MPH at one point as well.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And then you do that for a long time, I'd imagine.
I did actually for quite a long time. And I actually wasn't part of the VA system initially either, because I'd asked the question, I'd been told I wasn't eligible for it, but I don't remember when exactly I got started. But it was about 20 years later. It was about 2 decades, just being more or less on my own, being a support group of one, as I've called myself. I had a really good endocrinologist, actually a really good internist for a long time. Looking back and comparing how I managed the disease then with how I manage it today, I mean,
completely different.
That's a hard comparison to make. It's like you're like, oh my God, what was he thinking? Well, what I was thinking was the best that I had available.
Sure. No, I mean, we talk about it a lot. That obviously in this lifetime, we have seen some significant changes, both in the insulin, the delivery methods, and the measurements. And the way you can see it and how it's changed things is incredible. Because I'm assuming you were on an exchange diet at one point. You were probably eating at certain times at another point in your life. Certain amounts, right? They gave you the food chart and told you to have starch.
Yeah, I probably was. Yeah, I got all that information, but
okay.
The real truth of the matter is, there were days where I'd eat whatever I ate, and I'd feel crazy, and maybe I need to take more insulin. And there were days when I had crashes, and
you didn't eat enough.
There was just no way to see what was going on. And I remember getting my first finger stick meter somewhere in the mid 80s. And that was certainly a game changer, but by itself, it didn't change the long-term aspects really, because, okay, I can take a finger stick. Oh, I'm really high right now. Probably should take some more insulin. Or I can take a finger stick and, oh, I'm really low right now. Probably should eat some ice cream, but that's not a management scheme. These are just
versions of not having a seizure and not being too high. So
exactly.
It's not real value for your health.
And over time, I mean, I had more than one experience where I had a hypoglycemic crash bad enough to take me to an emergency room. I did that 5 or 6 times.
Okay. Are you with somebody in your 20s, dating or married or anything like that on your own?
Now and again, I'd have girlfriends, and seemed to have an affinity for nurses because they were really good at getting me up in the middle of the night and getting orange juice down me, things like that. But I've been married twice. Those are both long stories. The more recent one was very amicable separation and divorce about 2.5 years ago. And she and I still stay in touch. We're still good friends. She's an RN, and she had a long history as an RN of working, a floor nurse in hospitals. And then she later went back and got a PhD in nursing research. So she's a smart cookie.
Mm.
And one of her comments after knowing me for a while and us being together for a while, she said, I had no idea what a roller coaster this thing could be.
Yeah.
And this is from somebody who's a medical professional.
Yeah. Oh, James, I'm in the middle of a series right now, a couple of them, but I'm in the middle of one series now where medical professionals are coming on and they're speaking anonymously. Yeah. And they'll you don't know who they are and their names are being changed. I've heard, God, so many different things now, but one thing that sticks in my head is that an RN with type 1 told me I'd be safer having a seizure in your living room than in my emergency room.
Right.
And I was like, wow, that's really something,
I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it. So for me personally, I mean, I didn't actually get connected up with the VA until the late 90s. And that was at the Loma Linda VA Center in Southern California in the Inland Empire. One of the things this is a little bit of a side note, but one of the things I've discovered, this is purely anecdotal, purely experiential. I don't have any hard data about this, but I have a strong belief that one of the really good things about the VA is that there are a number of major VA hospitals all across the country that are closely associated with nearby major teaching hospitals. So, for example, Loma Linda, it's Loma Linda University Medical Center. Here in San Francisco, it's UCSF.
Mm.
Down on the peninsula, Palo Alto VA is close connected with Stanford. The synergy that happens there is that the attending physicians at the VA wind up coming from the faculty and staff at the medical school. So there's this win-win of getting first-rate medical care at the VA because it's the best doctors who are the teachers who are the most knowledgeable, who are doing the major supervising. And from the point of view of the medical school, this is like this immense, incredible cesspool of disease and afflictions and things that need looking at and care and learning about, that the medical students can go there and just pretty much learn as much as they need to.
Yeah.
First experience I had in Loma Linda was this endocrinologist coming into the room, and I immediately liked this guy because he had on a Hawaiian shirt. So the feeling, the sense was, here's a guy who he's not standing on ceremony. He wants to feel comfortable, and he certainly wants me to feel comfortable. They didn't even have to say it; just was in the immediate vibe. And behind him, like a row of ducklings following their mother, were all these med students in their little white lab coats, and they were there to see and observe. And so that's where I immediately got this idea, this sense that there was this major mutually beneficial thing going on at the VA. I got nothing but good things to say about the VA, by the way. They do an incredible job. They're huge. They're a giant bureaucracy. They were actually one of the pioneers, what's now called medical informatics, computerized medical record keeping. Mm-hmm. They were one of the first major systems to develop something like that.
Wow.
And they still use a version that goes back to the origins of that. So after I'd gotten involved with the VA, and after I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area from Southern California in 2000, so moved my medical care from the Loma Linda Center to the San Francisco Center. And in 2006, I'm driving north on the 101 here in Marin County, having a really bad hypoglycemic attack, just, again, one of those perfect storm kind of things. I managed to bounce my car off the K rail at on the high speed lane, swerved across 4 lanes of traffic onto an off ramp, got into the grass on the side of the off ramp, managed to get the engine turned off, and then I passed out. And sat there. When I finally came to, when I find him like, groggy, we've all had that experience coming too. I'm looking around trying to figure out where I am. I'm gradually realizing what's going on. It's after dark. I get out of the car. I walk 100 yards back up the off ramp because I'm not sure where I am, but I had to walk that far to go look up at the sign.
Right.
Okay, now I know which off ramp I'm at. I call 911. A very nice, very warm, very, very concerned lady, female CHP officer shows up, and the side of my car, driver's side of my car, is all dented and danged, and it was enough in this day and age where that totaled the car. The good news was I wasn't physically injured, other than the immediate short-term effects of the blood sugar crash. Car had to go to the car graveyard. And the CHP officer looks at me and she says, "Now, if you want, I can write you a police report." And she couldn't say this explicitly, I'm sure, but what she was telling me was, you don't want me to write a police report, because if you do, then you wind up having to go get your case reviewed at the DMV and blah, blah, blah. But since there was no physical injuries, and since there was only one vehicle involved, if there'd been more than one vehicle, or if there'd been anybody physically injured, she would have been required to.
Right.
She gave me that choice, and I said, "Thank you very much. I don't think that'll be necessary." We got a tow truck there, got the car taken care of. But this started a point in my thinking where this is where this phrase came into my head about being a support group of one. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to find some help and some support for this, because at that point, that was 3 decades almost. That was 2006. So that was at 30. I'm sorry.
It's damn near 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. That's 28 years in.
Yeah.
So I started looking around. I'm thinking, well, here, goodness gracious, I live in Marin County, California. There's a support group here for for toenail fungus. I mean, there probably is. That's
it's got to be somebody out here helping about diabetes.
Yeah, and come to find out, there really wasn't. There wasn't any type 1. There was one at Marine General Hospital that I found out about, and you had to be in their system in order not to have to pay a fee to come attend the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was $35. I remember this because I got there on a Wednesday or Thursday evening, whatever it was, walked into this meeting room, which is empty. I sat down, and about 10 minutes after it's supposed to start, this woman comes rushing in. She's all a little frantic, and she's, the nurse who was supposed to facilitate this, something had happened. And so this woman was an LCSW who had been tasked to go facilitate the type 1 diabetes group meeting. And but turned out she didn't know anything at all about type 1. So I wound up sitting there for about half hour, 45 minutes, giving her the long elevator speech, giving her the initial education about what type 1 was, what it's all about. It's autoimmune, it requires insulin, all this stuff. She's like, really? Wow, that's interesting. And asking questions and back and forth. And all in the back of my mind, I'm the only one in the room with her. I kept thinking, I had a check in my pocket for this fee, and we got done talking. And so I just kind of took the check out and set it on the table and pushed it across toward her. And she looked at the check, and she looked up at me, and she had this look in her, kind of a deer in the headlights look in her eyes, was like, oh my God, I don't want to take your check, but I don't have any choice in the matter.
Oh, James, I thought you were going to say you married her and ruined her life.
No. She didn't fall into that category. There are others might claim to, but in any event, so that was my experience initially. And I did eventually find a couple of ways to get connected with community. And certainly here in the Bay Area, the biggest ones are organizations like JDRF and DYF that have both in-person and online. Zoom has been this major, it's a cultural paradigm now that if one of the very relatively few good things that came out of all the COVID, I don't want to say hysteria and nonsense, but that's a big part of what's in the back of my head, is that this is now a thing culturally. So you and I, for example, now can sit down and have this conversation, me in my living room, you in your podcast studio.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where we are in the world.
Right. No, it's amazing. I would tell you that what you were looking for back then and eventually found, it exists online now to the degree that I don't know if I don't think it would ever kill like in-person meetups, but it really does fill a gap for people who are not going to get in their car and go meet some people.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And it's a big deal because you can also be faceless. Like that's one of the most valuable things that I've seen is, I have a Facebook group. I think at this point it has like 47,000 members in it. Right. And it gains 150 new members actually it's less than every 4 days, 150 new people. But the people who talk, the people who have it in them to be, extroverted or to even ask a question, even when they're really in trouble, and they need to ask a question, it's a small portion of people that are able to do that. But the value for the rest of them that are lurking and watching and reading, they would never ask that question on their own, and yet they get the answer. And that's really wonderful. And they still feel supported, even though the other people there don't know they exist. I didn't know that would happen. I mean, James, you don't know me, but I started the podcast. Podcast was popular. Somebody at some point said we need a private Facebook group to talk about the podcast. And I did not want that. I didn't want any part of being on Facebook and running a group. It all sounded horrible to me. But that group's only, is it maybe 4 years old? And it's almost got 50,000 people in it.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was not a thing I set out to do. Like the podcast, the way the podcast is going, this I did on purpose. That that just happened, Yeah. So it's great. So, and by the way, James, I didn't know it because of all the weird things. And, it doesn't get said a lot, but of all the weird things, I don't have diabetes.
Right.
I don't actually know the personal internal drive of somebody who might need community for that. So it was a blind spot for me. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. Boasting a 6-month sensor, the Eversense CGM offers you these key advantages: distinct on-body vibe alerts when high or low, a consistent and exceptional accuracy over a 6-month period, and you only need 2 sensors per year. No longer will you have to carry your CGM supplies with you. You won't have to be concerned about your adhesive not lasting, accidentally knocking off a sensor, or wasting a sensor when you have to replace your transmitter. That's right, there's no more weekly or bi-weekly hassles of sensor changes, not with the Eversense CGM. It's implantable, and it's accurate. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. The Eversense CGM is the first and only long-term CGM. Eversense sits comfortably right under the skin in your upper arm, and it lasts way longer than any other CGM sensor. Never again will you have to worry about your sensor falling off before the end of its life. So if you want an incredibly accurate CGM that can't get knocked off and won't fall off, you're looking for the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. I used to hate ordering my daughter's diabetes supplies. I never had a good experience, and it was frustrating. But it hasn't been that way for a while, actually for about 3 years now, because that's how long we've been using US Med. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. US Med is the #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They are the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod DASH, the #1 fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide, the #1 rated distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys. They have served over 1 million people with diabetes since 1996, and they always provide 90 days worth of supplies and fast and free shipping. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Libre 3 and Dexcom G7. They accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. Find out why US Med has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau at usmed.com/juicebox, or just call them at 888-721-1514. Get started right now, and you'll be getting your supplies the same way we do.
I'll jump off from there to go on that once I got into this mode of thinking that I've been this support group of one now for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
Time for me not to be part of a larger support system. And so one of the things I wound up doing was going back through my resources at the VA. And it turns out, again, the VA has gotten mixed messages broadcast in media over the years. And you keep hearing, anybody who has any knowledge or subject or opinions about it probably has heard horror stories on the news about somebody having to wait 6 months to get a cardiac appointment and they die, and then stuff
Right.
like that. Does it happen? Yeah, it does. But I got to say, my experience again has been remarkable. I got no bad things at all to say about the VA, and a lot of very good things to say. They do an incredible job in a very, very challenging. And I'm not just talking about type 1 or even type 2 diabetes in general.
Everything.
I'm talking about everything that they manage, which is pretty much the entire spectrum of medical issues that any medical system anywhere in the world has to handle in this day and age. And that includes mental health services. So one of the things I wound up doing was getting involved with a program at the San Francisco VA that makes use of a psychological modality called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And that, for me personally, both generally in my life, but in particular with regards to managing the diabetes, has been a huge, huge benefit. And it's basically a technique it's a learned technique of dealing with feelings, emotions, and thoughts that are troubling in a way where you make deliberate, conscious choices about how you're going to react to that. I can't stop a thought or a feeling from coming into the back of my head, but I can make a conscious choice about how I'm going to react to that. And over time, it becomes a practice thing that gets into the equivalent of muscle memory, where I don't even have to sit and go through the chart down and sit and write down, okay, what was the bad thought? What's a better thought or a true thought that might replace it? What's false about that? What's true? What's really true? How can I, that's there's this learned process you go through, but it's something I do day in, day out, moment by moment, almost sometimes. And particularly as much as anything with regard to type 1, that involves having a way of being able to do something that probably in hindsight was not a real smart thing to do, like eat a whole carton of ice cream just because I want to. And then later, being able to say, you know what, that was really dumb, but yes, I know better, but also tomorrow I can do better, and tomorrow I do better because I
Right.
make a conscious choice about this. So this has been a mechanism that for me has been extraordinarily valuable.
And you only know about it because of the VA involvement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Right. So they took a thing that they were developing for people for combat reasons, probably. They developed this thing for reasons of probably people with PTSD and stuff like that, right? And then
the VA, strictly speaking, the VA didn't develop it. It's been a technique that's been around for a long time, but there's one practitioner in particular at the VA who adopted a nurse practitioner there who started a program that has become very successful, and it's not directly involved with, but it's connected to, it's affiliated or not affiliated. It's in conjunction also with the mental health issues that VA these days is probably best known for trying to handle is PTSD.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the guys in my CBT group were also part of PTSD support groups there at the VA. So this is, again, these are areas where the VA is making huge strides in providing opportunities for and realizing very positive outcomes in the long run.
Right.
And they do deal a lot with diabetes, although I have a suspicion, again, I don't have any hard data for this, but the population in general in the world today, what is it, I forget how many people are diabetic.
When you count type 1s and type 2s together. Yeah,
if you count type 1s, it's like something like 1 in 20.
Right. Yeah.
And of the people who are diabetic, 1 in 20 of those are type 1s. The 19 out of 20 are, these are very rough round numbers. Sure. But it's like 5% of diabetics are type 1, 95% of diabetics are type 2.
Well, a number of years ago, there was a big push to get people to realize when they were pre-diabetic. And I've kind of haven't heard as much about it at this point. Now, I think it did its job that everybody knows, hey, my A1C is 6. It shouldn't be. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. But they were, I mean, I forget the numbers there, but there were staggering numbers about people who they thought had pre-diabetes just based on the data that they could see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So point being that at the VA, they clearly deal with a lot of adult diabetes, type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
I don't think they have as large a percentage of diabetics that are type 1 at the VA for the simple reason that you don't get VA care unless you're previously active duty or unless you're previously in the military. And if you're type 1 diabetic to begin with, you're not going to get into the military. That's a medical exclusion. If you become type 1 while you're in the military, then you're going to get discharged, or at least in my case, what you were talking about earlier about maybe shutting you off into a job that's
not
less
combat related.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something like that. There may be more considerations like that these days, but still, I got to believe that probably skews that percentage within the population that are treated medically at the VA for service-connected disabilities. So a much smaller percentage of diabetics there are type 1 than are percentage of type of diabetics in the population of the world as a whole. So in that sense, that's another reason why I'm very grateful to the VA, because in a lot of ways, I'm this outlier. I'm like this came out of left field. Yeah, I have type 1 diabetes, but look where I was when it happened, and look what path I followed afterwards.
That stuff's uncommon.
Where I wound up, where I am today. In 2007, my CDE at the VA, who she's a nurse and she also happens to be a type 1 diabetic, and oddly, since she's not a veteran, she doesn't get her medical care at the VA. She gets it through Kaiser or something. But she comes running down the hall waving a magazine at me. Have you seen this? Have you seen this? And it was a magazine ad for the Dexcom System 7. I'm not sure I was the first. I believe I was the first, but if I wasn't, I was one of the very first patients ever at the VA to use a Dexcom System 7 in 2007. And that was a game changer.
Oh, yeah. So that'll confuse people.
Yeah.
Who are or newer diagnosed. Right now, the Dexcom G7 is the latest version.
Right.
When they came out, they called it it was the Dexcom 7, and they called it the 7 Plus, and then all of a sudden
they called it the System 7.
Right, and then they went to G4 eventually.
It had a different form factor than eventually they moved to the G4 and then the G5, which are the ones that are the same form factors as the G6. The G7 is the new one that's a single insertion,
right?
Integrated transmitter sensor.
Yeah.
So I got started fairly early with what are now become the conventional CGM sensors at the VA.
That's something. That's great. Yeah, I mean, you've had a great experience. And, it's like anything else online. You're going to hear bad things about big systems because some people are going to have bad, interactions, and then that's going to be their report. Also, I think people who have bad times are generally more vociferous than people who, have good experiences.
The analogy I use is that anytime an airliner crashes and 500 people are killed, that's headline news and it's on the news for 6 days. You have never, ever in your life heard a news broadcast that said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, 35,462 commercial airline flights took off and landed safely with no one being injured in any way, shape, or form."
It's not exactly.
You will never hear that headline. If it leads, it leads, right?
It's just how it goes, right? I mean, I've heard what you've said. Like, I've heard enough news stories about somebody involved with the VA that got screwed over or something like that, or they died or but that, again, it's news. So that's why you hear about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't believe it's typical. And I mean, again, my experience is anecdotal, but I also see and talk to other people who are there
having good experiences.
We get really first-rate medical care.
It's excellent. I mean, honestly, it's not just excellent, but how long were you in the Naval Academy for? That's a lifetime.
4 years.
Yeah, for 4 years of effort, you're getting paid back for the next 40. You know what I mean? That's not bad for sure.
There was a time when I thought in terms of, how do I feel about the U.S. taxpayers paying for my medical care? And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm a taxpayer too, so I'm just going to count on my accounting sheet. Everything I goes to federal taxes. That's my medical
comes back to your diabetes. So at what point? So you find CGM pretty quickly. What's your experience having so many decades without it, and then having one of the first CGMs? Is it an eye-opening moment for you? Does it drastically change how you care for yourself? What happened in there?
It's eye-opening, but it's eye-opening in a gradual way. Yeah, there's this. If you're a tech geeky type of person at all, which I certainly am, and anytime you get a new toy, you're like, ooh, this is so cool. And so that first year that I had that System 7, I think my A1C dropped from over 7 to the first one I had after that was like 5.8.
Oh, wow.
And
why? What changed?
What changed was I could see these numbers. I could see this graph and see that if I did this, wow, it does that. And so if I don't do this, if I do something a little different, it doesn't do that. It does this. And that was fascinating, A. And B, I defy you to ever find a type 1 diabetic who's had a serious hypoglycemic episode and says they enjoyed it.
Yes. Avoiding them is also a big part of getting technology, that's for sure. And sleeping too, right? Like sound or sleep?
Well,
or not right away.
Yeah, it's, again, things were gradual, but it definitely was an eye-opener, and it was the beginning of a newer part of my path and my journey to where I am today, which is I'm currently, for the very first time in my life, I ever started using a pump in 2018. It was when the Medtronic 670G AID system came on the market.
Kidding.
That was really the first hybrid closed loop system to make the market. And I've been talking with my endo and my CD at the VA. Does it make sense to go to a pump? Well, we got this new thing coming. Let's kind of wait until that whole new hybrid closed loop system, and then think about making the jump. And we did. And again, that was a major improvement in my overall care. Now, the flip side of that coin is that both that first 20 years you're talking about being MDI and clueless, basically. Gradually, slowly over time, I lose weight. I lose being in physical shape gradually to a degree. These things are things I'm not happy about necessarily, but they're also things that, partly because of what I was talking about earlier with the CBT, I'm able to look at and say, okay, I could very arguably have done better. Yes. Is that a true statement? It absolutely is. But so if I didn't do better, should I feel guilty about that? And the answer to that is an absolute no. Mm-hmm. And I'm able to get there mainly because I know that however well or poorly I've done by and large the best I can. And I am 46 years almost into this. I'm going to be in Boston in 2028 to get my 50-year gold medal.
I want to ask you, do you have any symptoms of long-term complications?
Not really. The main things I have at this point, at this stage in my progress, I've gradually developed insulin resistance over time. So my TDD these days is between 80 and 100 units a day. which is way more insulin than I'd like to be taking.
James, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
May I? Go back to that VA and tell them you want Zepbound or Wegovy for weight loss, and wait until you see how your insulin needs go down.
Yeah, well, I'm already having that discussion.
Good.
But there's so many GLP-1 antagonists out there. Tell me again the names of the ones you just...
So you're only going to qualify for weight because you're type 1. So they won't give you Mounjaro, but Mounjaro's for type 2 right now. It's classified for weight loss as Zepbound. And you get a GLP-1 with a GIP at the same time. Right, you're right. Yeah. I'm kind of up to speed on the whole subject here. I get lost in the trade names for all the drugs. I am 2 weeks shy of a year on a GLP. I'm 47 pounds lighter today than I was last year. Wow. And my daughter, who's 20, is taking just a small dose of Ozempic right now, once a week, and her insulin needs went down drastically. I had an episode on last week with a mother of a 15-year-old who had type 1 for 3 years, and her daily insulin needs went from like 70 down to 7. Well, one of my perennial, and this is also, that's not just me, the community in general, one of our perennial complaints has been the lag time between the realization of the efficacy or the potential efficacy and the value of pursuing investigation into the efficacy of different treatment modalities and how slow it takes. So everything you're talking about has to do with what's called labeling and the FDA approvals, all of which that's kind of one subject. So it's very clear that type 1 diabetics over a long period of time, they develop insulin resistance, which is the principal characteristic of type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't it make sense to... we're a year or two from that being reclassified, I think, because of the insurance hammering. But I'm going to tell you something. I don't usually, I guess it's not true, but I don't usually take credit for a lot of things that I do. I am out in front on the GLPs. I am going to talk about it moving forward. I've taken some crap from some bro science people online who think it makes you muscle waste or your bone density goes down or whatever they thought the first day it came out, and one of the big podcasters yelled about it one day or something. If you haven't used it, you don't know what you're talking about. First of all, I can't tell you how many people with type 1 diabetes are just saying things like 20% reduction in my insulin needs, or I dropped 30 pounds, or how about that voracious hunger that a type 1 can feel because of the lack of, amylin and stuff like that. And now that's gone, and all the value it's bringing. And how about a lot of people? All of that is part of where I am right at this moment. Yeah, of course. And so that's part of my next step is pursuing the GLP-1. You have no idea, James, in just a couple of weeks on it, how much different you'll feel. It's fascinating. I had to adjust my daughter's insulin a week into the first injection. I was taking her insulin that frankly down. Is the only thing I'm a little worried about right now is, wait a minute, now I got to go back through a whole other cycle of figuring out insulin doses and carb ratios and basal setups. But I've got the tools to do that with too. So no, you do. Well, so you tried 670G back then, but what are you using right now? Well, I switched from the 670 to the 780 late last summer, and that was subsequent to being involved in a clinical trial over at Diablo Clinical Research, that used the 780G, but the trial had to do with a new sensor system that Medtronic's coming out with that at the time they called the DS4 sensor. It's Medtronic's answer to the Dexcom G7, and it has just now come out. It's actually available in Europe now, and they call it the Simplera. Okay. Since it's a single insertion, and for me it worked awesome, and I had enough time to, while I was on the study, to get the VA to pony up and send me a 780G and start acquiring some supplies a little bit for a month or two while I was on the study. Because one of the things we absolutely have to do is you want extra of every sensors, fusion sets, insulin. You want everything in supply, more than you need until you get your next set of refills. It'll definitely be in America soon enough. Yeah, it will. And the results I got were I went from being on the 670 somewhere in the mid 70, call it 75% time in range, to being in the mid to high 80s. And that's where I am right now with my own 780, but using the slightly older sensor, the Guardian 4 sensors. The 780G, I hear a lot of good things about it, actually, from people who use it.
I also was involved in 2020 with a study with Dr. Buckingham at Stanford testing Medtronic's 7-day infusion set. I got really good results with that.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm using right now is the Medtronic 780G, the Guardian 4 sensor, and the extended wear infusion set, which I helped. I was part of it.
Test it, yeah. So
part of the cohort that proved that works.
Yeah, I'm looking here. MiniMed 780G. This is Europe. System with the Simplera Sync sensor will be available in Europe via limited release in spring 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a little ways to get it over to America then, probably.
Yeah, and you know what? It'll take as long as it takes, but when it gets here, it'll be another major game changer.
Yeah.
Where I am right now is I can change my entire infusion set in my sensor system in about 10 or 15 minutes at the most.
Yeah.
That's not counting having to recharge the transmitter, which will not be the case with the Simplera sensor once it's
disposable, like the Libre or the Dexcom. I should say, James, I'm sorry, Medtronic is the sponsor of the podcast, as is Dexcom. And so I should just say that. Yeah, no, I think this is terrific. It took them a little while, but they're coming back pretty strong. Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that where Medtronic's heading with the Simplera is not just the newest sensor for theirs, because they've always kind of been in this. We're using our own sensor. We're not integrating with Dexcom, but it's pretty clear that what they're doing with the Simplera is going head to head with the Dexcom G7.
Oh, for sure.
In both the pump integrated and in the standalone markets.
Yeah, no, they're just trying to drive people to their pump too. They're never gonna, be a situation where you can hook a 780G to a Libre, for example.
Which actually begs the question of, this is another popular topic in the community is interoperability between devices, and the whole reason for the existence of things like Tidepool, which I'm a huge fan of, and I've met and listened to Howard Luck talk on a couple of occasions. I had a chance, actually, at Diabetes Camp last summer up in Bearskin Meadow to chat with him a little bit. Very cool guy.
He's been on the show. Yeah.
The whole idea that these devices should all exist in their separate little niches, and it should be possible. This is my rant. It should be possible to go out and buy whatever pump, whatever sensor, whatever system you want that works for you. And what works for you includes things like how well does the adhesive affect your skin, So if Medtronic sensor makes you turn all red, but Dexcom doesn't, you ought to be able to use the Dexcom sensor with the Medtronic pump.
Right.
End of discussion.
Yeah, but Medtronic's, they've got a pretty big market share. So I think they think, if I'm in their head, I think I can make people use our pump as long as we come along and get a CGM. By the way, they get screwed. Here's one thing, and I've made fun of Medtronic over the years for that, for the Harpoon, and everything, but they were first. They did it. So thank you. You know what I mean?
You're gonna first. The 670 was, for all the stuff you can criticize about it, it was a game changer.
Yeah, right. And first one in is going to get bit by the shark. So fair's fair. But it also took them, in my opinion, it took a little long to get to this Simplera thing. I don't know what happened.
Well,
but
none of us have direct insight
I don't know what's happening.
Into the vagaries of getting FDA approvals and what you have to do moment by moment, detail by detail to get approvals and all that jazz. And I think that as a society, we're way too deep into that. That's just my personal opinion.
Too deep into, I'm sorry, into what?
Into the things are overregulated.
Yeah, well,
in general, but specifically when it comes to, if there's something that's available that's going to be helpful, that's going to make my life better, I ought to be able to make an informed, conscious decision. Sure, talk with a doctor or with somebody with a practitioner, a professional practitioner who's knowledgeable on the subject, and who can give good advice.
Well, go ahead and find one of them, James.
Well, I actually have a couple. At the VA. There's plenty out there. The problem is finding them. And also, this is another popular topic of conversation. But I'm depressed because I can't. My doctor doesn't appear to be listening to me. Fire the doctor.
Yeah. No, I know it's hard to get people to move on.
Pick a different practitioner.
Also, some people live in places where there's just no options. Like some people are stuck with what they're stuck with, but I take your point. Yeah.
And again, there's no good excuse in this day and age why they're stuck in it, not because of their choice or because of anything that's negative about them. They're stuck in that choice because there's only one little hospital or clinic nearby. But we live in a world where, like we talked earlier, this connectivity exists in a way and functions in a way where it's now possible to, and if you don't realize that, if you're not aware of that, then you have no pathway out of that this sense of depression of I don't have any other choices. Well, wait a minute, maybe I do. Okay, well maybe I need to think about going out and making some searches on here and talking to people and getting into the group on Facebook and asking questions and finding
a way.
Endo who's the other side of the country, but who's on my insurance plan and who I can talk to remotely.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. It's a work. I think some people are overwhelmed too, and then
I wouldn't be surprised.
You get trapped in that cycle of like, this isn't going well. I've got no hope. I don't know what to do. They don't know what to tell me. My health is slipping backwards. What am I going to go find a guy across? It's hard, So I put up a list of endos that people like have good success with. I try to keep an active list on my website of that, but still even that is like, I can't be out there every day reminding somebody, hey, there's a list here. Like it's a never ending battle to keep the information in front of people, to keep them motivated to try to do those things that are difficult, especially when they're getting up in the morning and going to work and they're raising kids. And it's a tough slog. It really is. What else is on that list of yours over there?
Well, I got to thank you for one thing. I think I mentioned I had started listening to you a while back to some of your Pro series. And there was one discussion in there about pre-bolusing that when I listened to that, I mean, I heard the term and it kind of makes sense. And it's one thing to hear something intellectually and think about it and realize that makes sense. But it's another thing to kind of really get it kind of ingrained in you. And I started doing that. And that has made a huge improvement in not overshooting. If I bolus right when I'm eating 80 grams of carbohydrates, then I'm gonna be up over 200.
Yeah.
If I bolus 20 minutes before, I go up some, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And that's been huge. So thank you for that.
Well, first of all, it's my pleasure. But secondly, you have 46 years with diabetes, and I'm the first time somebody said pre-bolus to you?
No. It's not that I'd never heard the term. It's that it's one thing to hear a concept, and it's another thing to internalize it.
So you think that listening to the podcast made you go, all right, I'll try it? Yeah. Okay.
I think so. And it was you, and I can't remember the woman you were discussing. It's the doctor who you talked
Jenny.
With.
She's a CDE. She's also got type 1. Yeah.
Right. So another thing kind of on my list here has to do with the general subject. And I've mentioned a couple of my own participation in this, but getting involved with, this is something I would recommend to anybody who's type 1, who is in the process of developing and pressing in the direction of more confidence about their ability to manage the disease. First of all, I heard a lecture by a woman named Jessica Bernstein in 2007 or 2008. She's a psychologist over in the East Bay. Had been type 1 since she was 2 or 3 years old. And she made a point about the word control and how that steeped in that word is this inference, this idea of a guilt burden. So if I'm not in good control, it's because I'm doing something wrong, so I'm therefore guilty. He said, let's throw out the word control. Let's because there are times as we all know, there are times and circumstances where things go haywire, and it's not because of anything I did that's bad or wrong. It's just that's the nature of the disease. So let's substitute the word management. So in my own management of this disease, you get to a point where you get a little bit more confident about it. And for me, that took 40 years to get to that point. Really, frankly, there's always more to learn. There's always more to know. There's always new epiphanies to come to. And in a way, that's kind of as an engineer and as kind of a geeky guy, that to me is fascinating and fun. I'm my own guinea pig, and I get to see some days things work well, sometimes they don't, but on the days where things work well, I get to say to myself, damn, I'm really getting better at this.
James, do you ever wonder if you were diagnosed with this technology, how quickly you would have come to that? Because that's a long time.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, I know you don't.
I'd like to believe that it would be have been a lot quicker. because of the presence of the technology. But I'm not a humble person. I don't try to be, but at the same time, I try to be as realistic as I can. Some days it works, some days it doesn't. About reflecting on my own, my own limitations as a human, my own and my abilities. And so, the short answer to your question is, I'd like to believe yes.
Yeah.
That had I been diagnosed, had this whole time frame for me moved forward 30 or 40 years, then I would right today I'd be as where I am, but in a lot shorter span of time.
Quicker order. Yeah.
Okay, great. But at this point, in a way, that doesn't matter because I am where I am right now, and I'm not planning on going anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm not planning on. There's going to be a point in time in the not terribly distant future where there are people alive who are type 1 diabetics who've been that for over a century. Part of that is because lifespans in general are increasing, and part of that is because the ability to survive and manage type 1 diabetes for long periods of time has been increasing and improving. And we keep hearing, there's a standard trope in the community about the cure is 5 years away, and the cure's been 5 years away for
70, 80, 90 years.
However long it is.
However long.
Wherever we are today, the cure is 5 years ahead.
Yeah. However long somebody's been telling you about
it. Now, it's not unreasonable to expect that 30 years from now, the cure is still going to be 5 years away.
Right.
Okay, great. Just take that as a given, which means that, like I say, there are going to be people that are going to pass the century mark. Jocelyn's going to have to, they've got gold medals and platinum medals now. They're going to come up with,
I've seen some people with
iridium medals or something.
Yeah. Well, have you ever seen somebody with a 75-year medal?
I haven't, but I know a couple of people. I know at least one person, Jack Griswold, who's
what's his name?
Jack.
Okay.
He's a friend of Stephen and ours.
Okay.
Stephen and mine.
It's amazing.
And he's over. I don't know if he has the 75-year medal or not, but I know he's over 75.
I don't know if Lily makes the medal, or is it still Lily, or did somebody else pick it up?
Well, Lily has a medal program, and Jocelyn Diabetes Center in Boston has a medal program. I think Jocelyn has the 75-year medal.
Okay.
I'm planning to get my 50-year medal, gold medal there. In 2020.
Good for you. Hey, when you talk about people, like how actively are you friends? Are you text friends? Are you at a meeting once a month, or just people I've met?
We're friends through connections through Diabetes Community Connections. So it's online every month here in the Bay Area. JDRF and DYF both have an online meeting, and DYF also has a couple of has an in-person meeting. Our friend Jack down in the peninsula has both an in-person meeting and a Zoom meeting that he does once a month. So there are a lot of opportunities here in the Bay Area, and by extension, we get people in the Zoom meetings who are from everywhere in the country, right? Again, that's that connectivity technology thing that exists today. So it's primarily in that context. I've actually met Stephen in person for the first time last summer up at Diabetes Camp. That's another. Well, there are a lot of different venues, both online and in person, where the community can come together. But those are principally where I know my diabetes friends. I don't, in general, know them outside those settings.
Those spaces, yeah. It's still hard, isn't it? Even with people wearing technology that you can see, it's still not a thing that people run around broadcasting constantly.
Another one of the arenas, if you will, that I'm currently immersed in is being single and looking to find somebody to date. So kind of for my ideal would be somebody who's type 1, who I'm attracted to, and who can dance West Coast swing. So.
And gets your engineering mind
and
too.
Who gets, that's the key thing. That's what's so attractive about this whole idea of the community. The very first time I ever walked into a room and sat down where there was a support group meeting, and all I had to say was, "I'm James. I'm a type 1 diabetic." Everybody goes, "Oh yeah." And there's a lot of parallels. I found a lot of interesting parallels between that kind of a setting and what are typically known as 12-step programs.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a way in which it's not the same reason for being there. It's not the same kind of reason for being there, but there's a way in which the dynamic works, which is similar, which is I get to sit here and talk about things that I wouldn't just necessarily talk in general, but I feel comfortable and safe doing so because everybody sitting around me here is going, "Oh yeah, nodding, yeah, oh yeah, I get that, oh yeah." They get it without me even having to explain things.
Right. And even if your experience isn't theirs, they can still make the connection to
Exactly.
To say, I see where he's coming from, even though I haven't had this experience.
Yeah.
No,
Exactly.
it's valuable. Like I told you earlier, it's valuable in a way that I didn't understand in the beginning. I do very much understand it now.
Well, and I've said before that if I ever met someone just offhand who had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, there are two things I'd tell them, and I'd insist that they, look me in the eye and hear and understand. The first one is, this is a century ago, this was the death sentence. Today, it is not. It can be managed. That's number one. Number two, you're not alone.
Yeah. That's important to know.
There is a community. Both of those are the two single most important things for any newly diagnosed type 1 diabetic to know and understand.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you very much. James, I appreciate you coming on and doing this with me. Thank you.
The pleasure's been mine.
Oh, you're very kind. It's interesting to hear. By the way, I have two possible titles written down for your episode. Almost Ensign. And then I don't know if you're going to get this even, but toe fungus support.
I think the almost Ensign probably is.
Yeah, that's probably where I'm going to lean. But you'd have to really be listening to hear at one point you said in the Bay Area, we have support groups for everything, like toe fungus support. And you rolled right through it very quickly. And I was like, God damn,
but you said that a moment ago. As you said that, I'm going, yeah, I did say that.
I
remember what I said.
Oh, no, I imagine you do. I'm trying to imagine a person listening going, toe fungus, so when's this going to come up? Can I ask you, if you don't get type 1 diabetes, like really looking back at yourself honestly, could you have made it through the astronaut program? You think you were a real candidate for that?
Yes and no. And again, part of that depends on timing. At the time, I had a focus and a dedication. That's really where I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew enough about it. And I knew enough at the time. When you're a teenager, you think you know everything. When you're graduated from high school, you got the world by the tail. And the sad truth of the matter is you don't know squat. You don't know jack. But you don't know that you don't know jack until you get to, my or your age at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to get this worry about, maybe I don't quite know jack. I believe I would have then. Today, that world is different. It's very different in a lot of ways that I'm quite vocal and opinionated about. And one of which is, I don't think the federal government ought to be involved in space travel at all. I'm a huge fan of what Mr. Musk is doing with SpaceX, and I think that's where the future of space travel is going to be. And if I wind up getting involved in it personally, I commented about a year ago in an online type 1 group. I said, I'm going to be the first type 1 diabetic on Mars. And that was said partly to elicit a humorous response.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a part of me that's actually serious about that. I think that's something alien landed, flying saucer landed on my lawn, and the guy stepped out and said, would you like a ride? I'd say, bye, y'all.
Right
I'm
now.
gone.
Yeah. So let me get my insulin.
Let me grab my pump. Let me grab my supply. I'm with you.
I can't think of the name of the episode, but I've had a type 1 on who she actually flies the International Space Station.
Oh, Haley Spears.
Jeez, I don't even know if that's her. I can't.
That may be a name you want to edit out. I have a good friend Haley who's a type 1. She doesn't fly it. She's one of the backroom flight controllers for the ISS in Houston. Yes. And I know her through a program called Space Settlement Design Competition, which is which I'm involved with. My younger brother's been involved with for 30 years, which is a program where high school kids get together over a weekend to design a space settlement. And us adults have the job of, on the one hand, cat herding, and on the other hand, making sure they don't run off the rails technically.
Can I tell you how crazy it is that you just said that? That's not the person I've on. So April Blackwell, she's the NASA Attitude, Determination, and Control Officer, which means she pilots the International Space Station.
Okay.
I can't believe there are two type 1s doing that. That's amazing.
Well, those are jobs you can do sitting at a control console.
Yep.
In a control center in Houston. And if you suddenly get a blood sugar crash, your hands aren't on a control stick.
Right. Yeah. You're not actually.
You can't be a commercial airline pilot with type 1 diabetes because of the risk of having a sudden hypoglycemic.
I've had one on. They just let this guy do it.
Really?
Yeah. It just happened not that long ago.
Well, that's recent. That's not historically. That's not the case.
Oh no. Historically, it has absolutely not been the case. But what's the guy's
Which is
name?
also why historically as a type 1 diabetic graduating from the Naval Academy in 1978, I can't be a naval officer.
Yeah. Pietro, it's episode 332. He, I think, is the first type 1 to hold a first class medical certification from the FAA.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's, I've had him on as well.
Well, that's history changing, because
Oh yeah.
in my early adulthood, one of the things I looked at is I've always wanted to get a private pilot's license. And it turned out at that time, I had a friend who owned a small plane, and he would take me down when I worked at Rockwell. We'd go down to Long Beach, and he put me he's an instructor. He put me in the left seat, and I took the plane off, circled, landed, took it off, circled, landed. He looks at me and says, "You're ready to solo?" And I said, "Seriously?" He said, "Yeah." And so we're driving back to the office, and this like hammer bong thought goes off my head. I wonder what being diabetic how it affects that. And it turned out at the time the answer was it was a mandatory denial for
Not anymore. There's a guy.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
But that's recent. That's not my experience. My life experience is that was part of that barrier that was down in front of me. That door is coming up now a little bit.
Yep.
I'm happy. I'm glad, but that part of my life is.
You're not looking to be a pilot at this point. Yeah.
Looking to get to Mars at some point, but I think I can hitch a ride.
Oren Lieberman, he works at CNN. I forget what used to be the Israel reporter. I think he does something else now, but he's a guy who, flies his own plane and, gets around a lot in a small plane. So, yeah, I mean, obviously things are getting easier. If you listen to Pietro's interview, I forget the salient details, but he somehow knew somebody at the FAA and he could kind of start that conversation. I think that's kind of how it got the attention of them. They're like, "Oh, CGMs or what?"
For him, I'm glad he did that, and that's another reflection of how the steady advances in both knowledge and technology have made it possible for those barriers that were down and solid and were immovable to very slowly and very gradually now start coming up.
Right.
I'm glad of that.
Yeah, me too. No, absolutely. It's these happenstancey like connections where you just go, wow, if that person wasn't in that room to say that thing that they would never know. It would just go on and on like that. But he knew about CGMs, he's a good pilot. He wanted to be a commercial airline pilot.
Right.
Started a conversation with somebody and it took years and it snowballed into something. So
I was in Dallas January, and one of the things I did was meet up with a buddy of mine from Minneapolis who I had not seen in 40 years, but we'd been just best friends for a long time. And he's a retired Southwest Airlines pilot, and he doesn't fly anymore because of mandatory retirement age. FAA says if you're 65, you can't be
you're done.
type 1 or not.
Yeah.
But he works at the Southwest headquarters facilities there at Love Field. And so he took me into the facility, took me into the flight simulator, and I actually took off and landed a 737 MAX 8
in the simulator
without
everything turning red in front of you.
and everybody who I've told that story to says, "Oh, and the doors didn't fall off, huh?" And I said, "No, they didn't."
That's amazing. Well, you've had a life. You're certainly having. You're still going very strong. How old are you at the moment?
I'll be 68 in March.
Good for you. That's wonderful. All right. Well, listen, James. Good luck with everything. Not least of which is finding a lady.
Yeah. Scott, I actually have a question for you.
Oh, okay. Nobody ever asked me questions.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. This is a thought that's been in my mind. I've gotten to know a little bit about you and about your circumstances, about how you came to all this, which really has to do with your daughter.
Sure.
Clearly, unambiguously. And it's also very clear that for a very long time, you have been her pancreas.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. And so the question really, and I don't mean this to be confrontational, but this is how my mind works. I see something and I go, I wonder about, and the thing I wonder about is, and this thought has to have occurred to you, and you may have even commented on this or had discussions about this on your podcast, but at some point, Arden she's already an adult, both legally and at some point she's got to be in charge of all that. And maybe that's already happened, but for you, what's it like to have to consider, I've been my little girl's pancreas since she was a baby.
Yeah.
And at some point I have to let go of that. To me, I'm thinking what your thoughts and feelings are about that. And
of course. Well, I'd be happy to tell you. So first of all, she takes care of herself now. I don't really have anything to do with it.
Why? Because I noticed you earlier, she's going low right now.
But I do have I mean, I didn't contact her, but there's a thing on my desk that just changes color when her blood sugar, it's called glucose. And it went it got red, and I thought, oh, that's strange. Like, time of day, I didn't expect her to be low around here. And before you and I started recording, I picked up a piece of software that I have, and I saw that she had just recently bolused for something. And I thought, oh, she probably just got a couple minutes early on her pre-bolus, and she's fine. She's actually 140 right now. I mean, she and I haven't talked about her diabetes beyond, I sent her a text yesterday that said, hey, I'd bail on this pump site if I was you. And then she did. We didn't actually talk back and forth about it. The last time I've had like real connection to like telling her about something is, you know, a low in the middle of the night that I woke up for, and, you know, I made sure she was awake. I helped her adjust her settings when she went on the GLP medication. That's not something, you know, it's unfair. I think she could have figured it out, but I just said to her, like, you have to make your insulin sensitivity weaker, you know, and, you know, what is it now? And let's try this. And we just kind of moved it by 10%, take a look, and moved it again. Other than that, I don't really have anything to do with it anymore.
So, and again, not to be confrontational.
You're not. By the way, I want you to know, James, this is a very, I hope this doesn't hurt your feelings. This is a very common question from old time type 1s to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so to my way of thinking, there's a difference between having been the pancreas and backing off and occasionally having a conversation. There's a difference between that and saying, you know what, I love you, dear, but you're on your own.
So I kind of subscribe to the idea that people's brains aren't fully formed in their early 20s yet. And I've seen a fair amount of research that says that people with type 1 diabetes benefit from parental support into their mid 20s.
Okay.
Like, and I don't mean like, hey, bolus now, or like, you know, change your pump. Like, I don't remind her to change her pod. I don't remind her about her CGM. Like, she does that all on her own.
Right.
She will come home from college once in a while and look at me and go, hey, could you do this for a couple of days? Because I need a break. Like that kind of stuff. But, you know, or we'll once in a while when she's home, we'll be in a restaurant and I'll see her phone come across the table and she goes, why don't you get this one? You know, like something like that about her bolus, right? But for the most part,
she's cool with you being with it being a collaboration.
She doesn't seem to care. Now, I've made significant adjustments along the way. I didn't go from like who I was when she was 9 to who I was when she was 20, like in a snap. The way I've always talked about on the podcast and the way I genuinely believe in it is that I don't think that teaching someone about their diabetes is any different than teaching someone about anything. Like, you don't just scream a bunch of bullet points at them and go, now it's your turn. You know, like, it's a very slow transfer of knowledge. I think is a lot of repetition. It's a lot of like, you know, hey, did you bolus for this when she was 8? You did? Great. That's great. How much did you do? That's nice. I was thinking that much too. Like, you know, and then you don't talk about it again.
Right.
And then on and on and on and on for years. Like, it's always been my desire and my goal to make it a very slow handoff so that she didn't notice it happen. So that it didn't feel like at any point, you know, the fulcrum shifted and all the weight landed on her.
And I understand. And that's actually a good answer to the question, kind of the way I asked it. Have you ever actually talked with her explicitly on that specific topic?
Oh, yeah. We've talked a couple of times. We've had a number of, like, I don't know what you would call them, like touch point moments along the years, because she was diagnosed when she was 2. So, and I was a stay-at-home dad, so I was with her the whole time. There's a couple of times we've sat down and I've said, hey, I need you to take this more seriously. Or you see this here, like that can't happen. Or we don't not bolus a blood sugar that goes over this number. Like we don't sit, and that's then the non-negotiable. We don't sit and watch a number that high. And so we along the way, and we've sat down at times and I've said, look, you're getting older now. You know, I see this one part of this you don't seem to understand. We need to talk about it. And we sat down and we went over this whole thing. There's still things, like she's still a kid. Like once in a while, she'll say something that like shocks the hell out of you. Like, I forgot how to use my glucagon. I had to look into it again. Or, you know, like I'm like, how'd you forget that? For the most part, it's gone the way I've expected it to go. But it's been a lot of thoughtful, quiet, behind the scenes effort from my wife and I, and a lot of her being very receptive along the way. Like we've had moments where she, you know, doesn't want to hear about it from me or something like that. but we've never had any long drug out like battles about it or anything like that. And I also know when to like, I'm not good about it with my wife still. I'm still learning. I've only been married for 27 years. But with her, when I see the resistance come from her, I know to like back up because nothing long-term and good is going to come from us like battling about one small unimportant moment. You know what I mean?
Sure. And
so,
and you know, to be fair and in the interest of, you know, truth in advertising, I'm not a parent, so I don't have the direct experience of being in the positions. I can't assert authority in that regard, but I count myself a fairly careful observer of how we humans interact. And I really think that, you know, parenting has got to be one of the hardest jobs to do. And one of the things I'm very grateful for in my life also are my parents. In particular, my mother, who, when I was a young adult, I had a conversation with her at one point, and she made a comment, something on, she grew up as a single child with a very emotionally abusive mother. And she made a personal decision as a young woman, a young, newly married, you know, newly become a mother woman who, and this was in the days long before all the commonplace concepts we have floating around these that we can talk about self-knowledge and how to deal with past traumas and how to not pass those along. But she made a conscious decision, and this is the word she used to me. She said that this abuse of the younger generation by the older was not going to go any further. So she had no idea. She had a picture in mind of what she was going to not do. I don't think she had any specific knowledge about what was the right way or wrong way to implement that, but she had that thought and that deliberate
basic foundation.
And I and my siblings we are the beneficiaries of that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. And
I grew up pretty poorly. Like, I wasn't parented well. And, you know, like my wife either. My wife, to her credit, because we got married pretty young, like, to her credit, she's like, she would like help me with like moments where she like, you can't do it that way. And here's why. And then, you know, like, and I'm like, oh, and like, you know, that's how I would have just got. You got
to be sufficiently receptive.
Yeah, you got to be receptive about it, and like, and then it takes time to build. But by the time the kids were a certain age, like, I pretty much figured out, you know, that kindness pattern and why that was important and everything like that. Right. Not that I wasn't unkind. It's just that I grew up in a house where I got yelled at a lot. So if something got out of hand, like, I thought to yell to stop it. You know what I mean? Like, that's just where I don't do that anymore for a long time. But when it came down to the diabetes thing, like, you have no idea. Like, I used to write a blog before this. I've been at this like a long ass time. And so I wrote a really popular blog. I was around people who all were writing, but they had type 1. And they'd always say to me, oh, sure, her A1C is good now, but what's going to happen when you're not controlling it anymore? And I was like, I don't, like, have you never had a kid? Like, I'm teaching her at the same time. I'm like, I'm not just like doing it and we're not talking about it. Right. You know, that's a parent's job, really, James, is to say something, say it again, find a different way to say it a third time, say it a 500th time, all without being annoyed by it or making you upset that you've heard it 500 times.
Right.
And I just did that with diabetes, and it's been a very slow handoff, and it's going incredibly well. Like, I should knock on something.
Yeah.
But she's in college and keeping her A1C in the low 6s. Like, and here before college, it was in the mid to high 5s. So, like, you know, I don't text her.
I don't see that's anything to complain about.
Yeah. I don't text her and go, hey, your blood sugar's 150. You should do something.
What's she studying?
She's learning how to design clothing. She's in art school getting a design degree. So it was very interesting. As she was leaving high school, she had it narrowed down to pre-law and fashion design. And she could have gone off and done either of them. And I was like, I wonder which way this is going to go, you know? Yeah. And then finally she said, I'm going to try this art school thing, even though she had never like really participated in the arts whatsoever.
Well,
she's doing well
for me
now.
Personally, as I say, I don't have kids of my own, but I have nieces and nephews. And I also have a strong conviction that there's no such thing as an adult, whether you've got kids or not, who doesn't reasonably have an interest in the welfare of the oncoming generation. So I mentioned the thing I'm involved with called space settlement design competitions. That's one thing I do. And the other thing I do is later this year, I'll be fully qualified to be what's called a Naval Academy Blue and Gold officer. And those are volunteers who help shepherd high school students, juniors and seniors through the entire application process, which is incredibly complex. and incredibly competitive. There's something like 1 in 20 or less of people who apply for a given class who are actually admitted.
No kidding.
More is the better, but this, helping identify the best possible candidates and then helping encourage and shepherd them through the application process, and then kind of keep an eye on them as a goal. That's something I want to be able to say at whatever point I get to in my life that I've left something behind me that somebody else can get some value and worthwhile.
I feel the same way about this. There's not too many days that go by that I don't think like we've put all this information in this one place. Like it's up to me to keep it alive so other people can find it. And, and keep building on it so that it continues to be valuable as norms, change and technology changes and everything. I feel a lot of pressure about that some days. Like that I should figure out a way to like make sure somebody has it when it's over. You know what I mean? Like if you stop and think about it, there have been great websites along the years that have great information on them. Nobody knows where they are now because they fall out of favor or whatever. And then all that great information is just gone. So
maybe at some point, get all the podcasts digitally copied onto a secure storage drive at some point and get it launched and landed on the backside of the moon where it's safe.
I've already set it up with the storage company that after my death, they'll keep posting it. Like I've got that set up. And I am currently looking at and toying with feeding it into AI so that eventually it can just be a website where you ask the website a question and it answers the question based on all the conversations from the podcast.
Wow.
So I'm working on that too. And then I got to retire at some point, James, because I can't talk as much every day. Although I probably could, but
I am actually semi-retired right now. So
how is that?
It's new. Getting used to the idea. And that was not voluntary. I think I worked for a company for 11 years and they closed their doors last November.
Oh.
And I'm like, holy shit. I wasn't ready. I wasn't planning to not be working.
I got to look for a job. I'm 68.
Yeah. Well, and I'm still doing work. I'm in a position where I qualify for Social Security benefits. So
maybe
bring it on.
Hey, do you code? Do you know Python and stuff like that?
I do. I am a coder. I'm not a Python coder, although I'm always got in the back of my mind that I've looked at that and that's something maybe I want to get a little more familiar with.
I just wasn't sure how much of that blended into your job based on when you started. That's all.
Well, I've made my living in a number of different ways, but most of it has involved doing computer stuff one way or another. Most of that in the last 30 years has involved things like AutoCAD. Okay. I'm actually an expert on auto. I'm also an expert on using things like Excel.
Okay.
I specialize in generalization. So I have a lot of knowledge. I have a great deal of knowledge about that goes at least a little bit of depth into a great many areas.
Yeah.
A few areas where I've got a lot of depth and one or two where I'm your go-to guy. The problem from looking for a job perspective is that makes me, instead of being even something as mundane as a round peg looking, trying to find something other than a square hole, I'm an amoeba-shaped peg in a world where the holes are all grossly different shapes and I don't fit any of them, not with any precision.
I sometimes muse that if I wasn't doing this, I don't know if anybody would hire me. And yet I'm incredibly successful at this one thing. Like it's very strange. So anyway, it's been great talking to you. I really do appreciate this. If you can hold on for 1 second, I just need to tell you something after we're done, but thank you very much. Been a pleasure. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. I want to thank the Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Learn more about its implantable sensor, smart transmitter, and terrific mobile application at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Get the only implantable sensor for long-term wear. Get Eversense. A huge thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Don't forget, usmed.com/juicebox. This is where we get our diabetes supplies from. You can as well. Use the link or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or call the number, get your free benefits check, so that you can start getting your diabetes supplies the way we do from US Med. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.